Well, as I was just saying then, the European Council is due to hold a special meeting tonight in Brussels on the developments in Ukraine. Christine Mhundwa is the Europe correspondent for Deutsche Welle. That's a German-based TV channel. She's joining us from Brussels now. Christine, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to the program. So, a lot for European leaders to discuss tonight. And as far as sanctions, I suppose it's how tough they should be.
That's right, Thembekile, and we already have a bit of a glimpse into that because shortly before we started speaking, Thembekile, the European Union's chief, Ursula von der Leyen, gave a briefing and she led us into some of what the thinking was in terms of those sanctions. We know that these sanctions are going to further limit Russia's access to capital markets, making it more difficult to borrow. The idea behind these sanctions is to suppress economic growth. It is to increase the cost of borrowing in Russia for the Russian government. The idea being to limit its capabilities of funding its military activity or aggression, as the European Union calls it. Inflation is inevitably going to be raised in Russia because of this. And we're told that these sanctions will also gradually erode the industrial base. But more importantly, the European Union is going to be targeting Russia's technology sector. They're going to be limiting the export of products like semiconductor chips. These are things that you need to power your modern day computer or any sort of modern device. They're going to target the technology sector, the idea being to limit Russia's growth in this perspective. And it's said here that it's really going to have a big impact on the future. So in addition to that, they're also going to be meeting to discuss the humanitarian crisis. It is expected that there are going to be some refugees, people fleeing Ukraine. The European leaders have to now agree on how they're going to distribute potential refugees coming in to the European Union.
Let's take a step back, Christine, for a moment and talk more broadly about the reaction from Europe so far. What's been said beyond the issue of deliberations on sanctions?
Well, there's widespread condemnation. Every single major capital has released a statement, and they've all been condemning Russia's actions here. And I think one of the things that has been interesting for us to observe is just the unity that we have seen among the European allies. The sanctions that were imposed before this, these were sanctions that we were talking about 2 days ago. Those were in response to the initial recognition of these two regions in Ukraine when President Vladimir Putin of Russia said that he was recognizing the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk. The sanctions that were imposed then targeting lawmakers in Russia and other individuals and entities were approved unanimously. This unity, if you listen to experts here, has almost taken Moscow by surprise. So there's been widespread condemnation, Thembekile, to all of this and a willingness to support Ukraine at all costs, essentially. That being said, then, at all costs, you say, but can and will NATO come to Ukraine's defense? Well, the short answer to that is no, not in the way of combat troops. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, spoke earlier today confirming that there were no NATO combat troops in Ukraine right now and that there would likely be no such deployment. That is because, Thembekile, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. NATO would only trigger Article 5, that is sending combat troops into a country to fight on behalf of a member or an ally. It's only ever done that one time in its history. That was in 2001 with the invasion with Afghanistan following the US 9/11 attacks. Because Ukraine is not a NATO member, there will be no Western soldiers on the ground fighting against Russian soldiers in this scenario. But the alliance has committed military aid. They are sending military support, military know-how to bolster the Ukrainian military, but there will be no combat troops on the ground. I wonder what the sense is then in Europe around diplomacy. There have been constant appeals for that to be given a chance. Is that route still open? You're quite right, Thembekile. The language from the Europeans has been diplomacy, 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 in the efforts to deter the Russians from taking the action that they have taken. You saw it in the weeks before this, a number of European leaders having telephone conversations, with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. You saw different summits at different high levels, foreign ministers engaging. Today, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that Russia had effectively closed the door to a political solution. He said that while we were trying to engage diplomatically, Russia was continuing to prepare what it's now done today. We're continuing to make preparations for this invasion. So and a number of diplomatic events that were scheduled have now been cancelled in terms of engagement with Moscow. What we are now seeing, for example, European leaders meeting, the Western Alliance meeting, there's a G7 meeting taking place. If I'm not mistaken, that actually should have started right now. There will be another NATO meeting. So it does appear for the moment that Europeans have given up on this diplomacy that was supposed to deter Moscow from taking the action that it has, as we now see this invasion underway.
Christine Mhundwa, Europe correspondent for Deutsche Welle, thank you very much for that update.